Rancher lived solitarily for years, until he purchased the last Apache woman abandoned, snow-dusted the road into Redstone Crossing, carried on a wind that bit at Reed Holston's knuckles as he guided his mule team down the main stretch. His coat was the color of the dry earth beneath, his beard ragged from weeks of neglect, his gray eyes faded from years under the sun. He didn't linger on the storefronts or the men leading horses. He came for salt, coffee, lamp oil, nails, and a new whetstone to replace the one that had cracked clean through. In and out, no delays. The last time he'd stayed past sundown, a drunk had stirred up talk of the war, Union scout, dead men, old wounds, and Reed had left without a word. His wife, Ellen, had been gone 10 years, buried on a hill behind his cabin with a cross he'd carved himself. The ranch was half alive, but it stood. That was his mission now: keep it standing, keep the fences mended, keep the days moving. He would have gone straight to the general store if not for the noise from the livery yard. Men crowded close, some laughing, some spitting, others watching with the vacant stare of boredom turning cruel. Reed slowed, not out of curiosity but because the path narrowed with bodies. He heard the words auction, last one left, worthless. His hands tightened on the reins before he set the brake and stepped down. She stood chained to a rough-hewn post, wrists red and bruised under iron. Her posture was upright, not stiff, not slumped, just steady. Her chin was level, her eyes clear, focused on nothing, as if she'd learned it was safer to look through men than at them. Her deerskin dress was torn, its fringed hem ragged, beads and feathers clinging in patches. The neckline gaped, exposing the curve of her chest, no modesty left to protect her. Her copper skin spoke of the land she came from, her arms and calves muscled from a life of work and walking. She was young, maybe 24, her black hair long and tangled, some braids intact, others pulled loose by wind and rough hands. Men jeered, their mouths twisted, leaning in with careless cruelty. She gave them nothing, no flinch, no tears. "She ain't spoke a word," a man near Reed muttered, spitting into the dirt. 3 days. Others sold quick. Not her. Won't kneel, won't cry. Just stands there. Folks say she's cursed or stubborn. Or both. Reed's jaw worked once. He stepped closer, boots sinking slightly into the dry soil. Her eyes shifted, landing on him, a quick, exact read, no plea, no hope, just assessment. He knew that look. He'd worn it after the war, waking to memories that chased him still. He could leave, buy his supplies, go home, mend his fences, and sit by the fire until Sunday when he'd walk to Ellen's grave and say nothing had changed. But if he left, she'd still be there at sundown, and some man with less patience would claim her, his intentions as certain as the setting sun. Reed reached into his coat, fingers finding the folded bills and coins he'd counted twice that morning. He stepped to the man handling the trade. "How much?" His voice was low, rough from disuse. The man blinked, surprised anyone was interested, then named a price, less than Reed held, but more than the woman was worth to him after 3 days unsold. Reed didn't haggle. He pressed the money into the man's palm. The man shrugged, satisfied, and handed over the key to the chains. The crowd parted as Reed unlocked the irons. Her wrists fell free, marked red but unbowed. She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched him. He gestured toward the wagon. "Come on." She followed, steps deliberate, her torn dress catching the wind. The men's laughter faded as Reed climbed onto the wagon seat, and she pulled herself up beside him, sitting straight, hands folded in her lap. He didn't ask her name. She didn't offer it. The ride to the ranch was quiet, the only sound the creak of wheels and the mule's steady steps. Snow flurried around them, dusting her hair and his coat. Reed kept his eyes on the road, but he felt her presence, a weight not unlike the rifle he'd carried through the war, something to be handled with care, not because it was fragile, but because it wasn't. He didn't know what to do with her yet, only that he couldn't have left her there. The ranch came into view as the light faded, a squat cabin, a leaning barn, fences patched with wire and hope. He stopped the wagon, set the brake, and climbed down. She followed, standing in the yard, her breath visible in the cold. "Inside," he said, pointing to the cabin. She walked ahead, her steps sure despite the snow. He unhitched the mules, led them to the barn, and glanced back. She stood at the cabin door, waiting, not entering without permission. Inside, the air was stale, warmed only by a low fire. He gestured to a chair by the hearth. She sat, her hands still folded, her eyes scanning the room, shelves of tools, a single bed, a table with one chair, a cross hanging above the mantel. He set a tin cup of water beside her and turned to the stove, stirring a pot of beans left from the morning. "Eat if you're hungry," he said, not looking at her. She didn't move toward the food, but her eyes followed him, steady, untrusting. He sat across from her, the firelight catching the scar on his knuckles. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said. She didn't respond. He didn't expect her to. He didn't know what she was, Apache, the man had said, the last one left. He didn't know what that meant, only that she was here now, and the ranch was no longer just his. Morning broke cold, the cabin's windows frosted over. Reed rose before dawn, stoking the fire, boiling coffee. She was already awake, sitting in the same chair, her dress still torn, her hair still tangled. He set a cup of coffee beside her, black and bitter, and a plate of cornbread. She took the cup but not the food, sipping slowly, her eyes never leaving him. He didn't know what to do with her. He hadn't thought past the auction, past the moment he'd handed over the money. "You can stay," he said, voice gruff. "Help with chores if you want. Or don't. Just don't run off." She nodded once, a small movement, and he left for the barn, axe in hand. She followed him outside later, silent, watching as he split wood. Her hands moved to gather the pieces, stacking them neatly without being asked. He didn't comment, just kept swinging. By noon, the woodpile was higher than it had been in weeks. She didn't tire, didn't complain, though her wrists were still raw from the chains. That evening, he found her mending her dress with a needle and thread from a tin on the shelf. Her stitches were precise, the torn neckline closed as best it could be. He set a blanket beside her. "Nights get cold," he said. She took it, wrapping it around her shoulders, and nodded again. Days passed like this, silent work, shared meals, her presence a quiet weight. She swept the cabin, fed the chickens, carried water from the creek. He fixed fences, cleaned the barn, sharpened tools. They didn't speak much, but her eyes followed him, reading him as she had that first day. He wondered what she saw, but he didn't ask. He didn't know her name, and he didn't press for it. Names brought questions, and he wasn't ready for answers. A week later, Reed hitched the wagon for supplies. She climbed up beside him without being asked, her blanket wrapped tight against the cold. In Redstone Crossing, eyes followed them, sharp, curious, judging. At the general store, Mrs. Carver, the shopkeeper's wife, leaned over the counter. "Didn't take you for the type, Reed Holston," she said, her smile thin. "Buying a woman like livestock." He didn't answer, just set his coins on the counter for the salt and oil. The woman, still nameless to him, stood by the door, her chin level, her eyes on the street. A man outside spat as they passed, muttering, "Apache witch." She didn't flinch, but Reed's hand tightened on the wagon reins. Back at the ranch, she spoke for the first time. "They hate me," she said, her voice low, accented but clear. "They don't know you," Reed said. "They don't want to." He didn't argue. He knew the town, knew their tongues sharpened by boredom and fear. He'd felt their eyes after Ellen's death, heard their whispers when he'd stopped coming to church. "You don't have to go to town," he said. She looked at him, her gaze steady. "I'm not afraid." He nodded, and something shifted, a respect, unspoken but solid. That night, she mended one of his shirts, her stitches as precise as before. He whittled a piece of cedar by the fire, shaping a rough horse. She watched, her hands still for the first time. "You make things," she said. "Sometimes." She nodded, and the silence settled back, softer now. A storm rolled in at the end of the month, the sky turning leaden, the wind tearing at the barn's loose boards. Reed hauled firewood inside as snow piled against the cabin. She helped, carrying logs without complaint, her breath visible in the cold. They worked until the pile reached the rafters, then retreated to the fire. The wind howled, rattling the windows. She sat by the hearth, her blanket around her shoulders, her eyes on the flames. "My name is Tala," she said suddenly, the word sharp and clear. Reed looked up from his whittling. "Tala," he repeated, testing it. She nodded. "It means wolf. My mother gave it to me." He didn't ask about her mother, her people, or what had brought her to that post in Redstone Crossing. He didn't need to. The weight of her name was enough, a gift she hadn't owed him. "Reed," he said, though she hadn't asked. "Holston." She nodded again, and the storm raged on outside. The next morning, they found a fence post snapped by the wind. Tala helped him dig it out, her hands steady in the frozen earth. They worked in silence, but it wasn't empty anymore, it was shared. When the post was set, she brushed the dirt from her hands and looked at him. "You didn't have to buy me," she said. "Didn't have to leave you there either," he replied. Her eyes held his, searching, then softened. She turned back to the cabin, and he followed. Spring crept into Redstone Crossing, the snow melting into mud, the air heavy with damp earth. Tala's presence had changed the ranch, not in grand ways, but in small ones. The cabin was cleaner, the woodpile higher, the chickens fed before dawn. She planted herbs by the creek, ones Reed didn't recognize but didn't question. She sang sometimes, low and soft, in a language he didn't know, and he found himself listening, the sound settling into the cracks of his days. The town still talked. Mrs. Carver's whispers grew sharper, and men at the saloon speculated about the Apache woman living on Holston's land. Reed ignored them, but Tala didn't. "They'll come one day," she said, standing on the porch as he mended a harness. "Let them," he said. She looked at him, her eyes steady but softer now. "You're not like them." "Never was." She nodded, and he handed her the harness to hold, their fingers brushing briefly. It wasn't much, but it was enough. One Sunday, Reed walked to Ellen's grave, as he always did. Tala followed at a distance, stopping by the creek to pick sage. He knelt by the cross, his hands on the stone he'd turned himself. "Things are different now," he said, his voice low. "Not better, not worse. Just different." When he stood, Tala was there, a bundle of sage in her hands. She didn't speak, just placed a sprig on the grave and walked back to the cabin. Reed watched her go, the weight of her name heavy in his chest. The ranch was still half alive, but it was standing. And now, so was she.